Welcome to MamaTokTok's A Different Take, a podcast where everyday people around the globe share a different take on everyday issues. I'm your host, Abi Mambo, and I'm pleased you're joining us today. Welcome.
Hi, Lisa. Welcome to MamaTokTok's A Different Take.
Hello, it's so good to see you, Abam.
Thanks for giving me your time on a Saturday night. And I'm itching to get in, but let's start by introducing you to the audience.
So, Lisa Thomas, and I thought about this, how to introduce myself in particular based on, the podcast that you've had so far and how people used such illuminating things to talk about who they actually are, not just, what they do for a living. So for me, I would first and foremost say I'm originally from Alaska, and I'm sure that we'll get into why that's such a distinctive part of my character. But I'm also an entrepreneur and an investor, and I've got a particular passion for emerging markets. And I would also say I'm a coach, and I'm a champion for equality, both gender equality and racial equality.
Thanks, Lisa. You are the founder and managing director of Samata. And so I want you to start us off by just talking to me about what Samata is, why it was founded, and why you do the work that you do.
Absolutely. Well, Samata Capital is a gender smart investment fund. And so we use gender as a specific lens when looking at investments. It's the first thing that we look at. And we look at three different definitions. So the first is, first and foremost, investing in female-led companies. And this is to try and chip at least a little bit away at the $1.7 trillion financing gap for women in emerging markets. Then the second lens that we use are companies that we consider meeting our definition of gender diverse. And so we have two different definitions that we use. The first one is at least one female co-founder who's part of the decision making. So making sure that women are really at the top. But the second definition that we use is related to management. And so it could be a male-founded team, but if you've got 30% of your management team is female, beyond HR and marketing, so beyond those stereotypical roles, we consider that to be on that pathway for really good gender diversity. And so we want to talk to you as well. And then the third screen that we use around gender is we want to see companies that are designing products and services specifically for women. So these could fall into, what we consider, very well-known categories. Could be around healthcare and education, particularly feminine hygiene comes up a lot. But we also want to look at companies that are redesigning products so that maybe they originally excluded women, but they now include them. And the example that I give for that all the time is that microfinance worked fairly well for women straight out of the gate. It allowed a lot of women to get access to financing. But as their businesses grew and microfinance institutions started to offer SME loans, or those borrowers tried to go to a bank to get an SME loan, they were completely blocked from being able to do that because most SME lending in emerging markets tends to be collateral based. And women haven't necessarily had the opportunity to be able to actually gain the wealth necessary to have collateral. In some cases, they have to have their husbands sign off, or in cases by law in some countries, women are not actually legally allowed to hold property. And so it barred them from being able to move forward. And so we'll look at companies that are redesigning products, such as a LendTech company that's actually designing a product for an SME loan for the market, but it re-includes women because it's based on, say, cash flow or credit score. So those are the three lenses that we look at with the fund itself. And I think, why did I start this fund? I think it's a culmination of my experiences over the last 15 plus years working and investing in emerging markets. And I think originally, I came out of business school and I was working for a paired nonprofit and social impact fund that was investing in financial institutions in emerging markets, both sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia. And that example that I just gave you about microfinance, we were working with a lot of microfinance institutions and we were helping them scale and to bring on new products. And then we realized the statistics in the portfolio, you'd have 80 to 90% women in the microfinance portfolio, and then you lose all of them when you got to the SME loan. And in some cases, it's because micro businesses actually can't scale. But when we realized, right, so when we realized that there was a big problem with having collateral in the loan structure, we then tried to refocus our efforts to creating cash flow-based lending products. And so for me, that was the first instance where if you are not intentional about the way that you design products, you may actually end up excluding the people you are trying to help
reach.
And so that was one thing. The next experience I had, so I moved on to, and I helped to found another fund that was focused on sub-Saharan Africa early stage companies. And we had about 30 to 40% of our portfolio that were in female-led or gender diverse teams. And when we talked to either mainstream or impact investors on the continent, they would say to us, well, we don't think these businesses actually exist. Where do you find them? And it goes back again to this idea of intention, right? So, people were starting to maybe have some of these, KPIs around trying to get to female founders, but they weren't changing the way that they were going out and finding these businesses. So for example, you'd have an investor that would land in Nairobi and set up drinks from 5 to 7 p.m. on a weekday. Well, what are women doing from 5 to 7 p.m.? They're
feeding everyone.
Say again?
They're feeding everyone,
right?
Feeding everyone.
Right? They're feeding everyone. They're putting their kids to bed. And in some cultures, it's entirely inappropriate for women to go out and have drinks with strange men, and predominantly they were men. And so it also goes to this intentionality about, if you set a goal, you're going to have to change the way that you do things in order to actually reach that goal. Otherwise, you're just paying lip service to it entirely. And so I think the third, and I don't remember if we had talked about this or not, but the third experience that I had that really sealed the deal, if you will, on starting Samata was I was headhunted to take over the Africa portfolio for a European investment fund. And I got into this interview. And one of the things that you do in these interviews is you talk about, what's the next thesis that the fund should go after? What types of businesses should we be investing in? And I essentially pitched the thesis for Samata, which is it's a gender lens framework. And the response that I got back was, oh, no, we invest in microfinance institutions. That's enough. And I bluntly said, don't you think that women need access to the same spectrum of financial products as men? And they said, we invest in microfinance institutions. That's enough. They essentially repeated themselves because they didn't have a good answer. So, and then the second piece was to that particular interview. It was the most misogynistic interview I'd ever been in my entire life. I'd never once had I ever been in an interview where someone asked me, if I was planning to have children, which as far as I was aware, that's a question you're not allowed to ask anymore. And so for me, I just kept pushing back in this interview. I was like, well, I don't know.
The employment lawyer in me is like bubbling up, ready to come out, right? And because we don't ask men that question.
No.
We don't ask men that question. And what has that got to do with the price of rice? Right? It's neither here nor there. But anyway, I'll keep the employment lawyer in, and I'll get back to hosting.
But it's also, that was a pretty overt one where I was like, wait, what? But there were more nuanced, questions where I really pushed back because, it was very much these kinds of attitudes about how a woman should be in a room, on a board as a management person. And there were certainly questions that you would never ask a man. So there were also more nuanced questions that you could tell that it goes back to this idea of competition and being better. But in this particular case, asking about, an aggressive personality was deemed inappropriate for.
Of course, because you're a woman and girls should be nice and pretty and cute and shut their mouths. which
That's
begs
right.
the question, why do you want me on this board? I think one of the things I've always found really odd about what you're describing is I know some people want to do it as tokenism, right? Let's just have a woman, because if we don't, people scream at us. But the reality is, once that woman or person of color is on that board or on that executive team, they have sway.
Absolutely. So I think, it's, and I'll say one more thing about that particular experience. And so I kept pushing back a lot, and I didn't think I was going to get it. And then they offered me the job. But then they offered me a salary which was less than half of what I had made 10 years prior and before my MBA. And so I said, thank you very much. I don't think that we have a common understanding of what the responsibilities of this job are. And I'm going to go and start my own fund. And so it's this, Samata is really this culmination of, we've got to be intentional if we want to get more capital out to women, making sure that women are in decision-making roles, and also building a culture at an investment company where women feel included. And that is what the culmination is for me about why I started Samata and why it's so important for me.
So there are a lot of things I want to ask you that build out from that. I want to talk about why you think people ask these kinds of questions, because it's easy to be presumptuous, right? And I know you and I are thinking the same thing, but sometimes the people who really just don't even know that they shouldn't be asking. So there's that question. For me, there's also the question just around intentionality, right? What it means, how you go about it, right? But then before we get to all those nuances, I want to go back. Why the focus on, in particular, Africa?
So for a lot of reasons. So after having spent, 8 to 10 years bouncing around a lot of different continents, my focus on, in particular, sub-Saharan Africa. So we don't focus on the entire continent. So I want to be clear about that. But on sub-Saharan Africa there's such an enormous amount of entrepreneurial activity that's going on, and particularly among women. And I think that is extremely exciting. So, there's a ton of businesses to look at on the continent, first and foremost. But I think for me too, I just have an affinity for the markets there as well. And I've always, I am a global type of person. I've loved every place that I visited, or I should say I've loved the people in every place that I visited, because I've been in some pretty scary places as well. But that's the thing, is that the people is what gets you every single, place that you go. And I absolutely love, the cultures that I find that I'm working with on the continent in particular.
Okay. So you just mentioned you're from Alaska. I have always been fascinated by Alaska because it seems so like in another world, right? Even when I was based in the US, Alaska, I mean, what I know about Alaska is like, don't hate me, Sarah Palin. That's
okay.
I know, but that's kind of what I know. And then of course, snow, right? Very, very limited things. So educate me a little bit about what it was like growing up in Alaska, because I just don't know, and I like to use this platform as a way to educate and raise awareness and share different perspectives.
But Alaska, wow, it is a very different place. And growing up there, and part of it is probably because my dad was a pilot, so he was always flying off to someplace else, and so everything else always seemed so far away. But it's a really unique place because you get a little bit of everybody there, right? You've got the folks who have come to see the beauty, right? They want to live in the wilderness, and they really want to make a home out in the middle of nowhere. Combined people who have, who are the intellectuals and dare I say it, the hippies. There was a lot of hippies when I was growing up in the city that I grew up in, and then mixed in with, we've got 2 military bases that are actually in the town that I grew up in. And also you've got folks who come up to do, the harder labor types of jobs in mining and fishing and oil. And so you just have this whole mix of all kinds of people. So I feel very lucky that at least where I grew up, it felt like at the time that there was a lot of progressive thinking. That I needed to learn more. I needed to get out. But it is an incredible place. It's Alaska's like everywhere else, and then not like everywhere else at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a very unsatisfactory answer. My parents moved there when they got married, and they drove to Alaska. And that's
okay.
Yeah, so they got married and they drove to Alaska. So my sisters and I, we were all born there, and I think maybe part of the elements that I'm leaving out of the story that we had talked about before was that it's not like the rest of the United States, where people live in towns, and even if you live in the suburbs, and maybe some of the more rural parts of the United States are like this. But in Alaska, the town that I grew up in, people grew up without water. They didn't have running water. And you'd have to go out, to an outhouse at -40, -50 degrees below zero. And I mean, they're called dry cabins, and a lot of people still live in them, now. Part of that's geography, but part of that is also the level of income that people have. And, we hauled water for our house until I think, when was the well built? I want to say I was either 10 or 12, but I will never forget when we got a dishwasher for the first time. It was like mind blowing.
Yeah.
It was the most amazing thing. It was the most amazing thing.
When the first time we talked about this, what struck me about it was we make a lot of presumptions, right, about things. And you had talked about the hauling of water, building of a well. You even talked about, dry goods, as, you grew up on powdered milk, right? Yeah. Because you don't have convenience stores right next door. You don't have supermarkets right next door. And I was just thinking, this sounds like my childhood in Cameroon. Yeah. There were long holidays from school where I'd go visit the grandparents, and if there was no running water, and oftentimes there wasn't, we're going down to a stream, a freshwater stream, to fetch water, or from time to time there's no electricity. So I grew up on powdered milk, and so to me, it never occurred to me that there was a difference, and I'm pretty sure that there was, but that was not how I grew up. Juice, for example. So we had boxed juices growing up, but that was something that my family didn't have. We drank soda. It was Pamplemousse or Fanta or Coca-Cola. And so coming to the US and being able to go to the store and buy fresh orange juice was really something. So when you told me that the last time we spoke, I was just thinking about how, just looking at us where we are in our lives right now, we look like very, very different people. But there's always that connection, right? If you don't spend time talking to people, you don't know what kind of commonalities you have. So thanks for sharing your story about Alaska, because now I can kind of see the connection for why you do what you do, where you do it. Let's now go back to intentionality. Part of your intentionality was in building Samata, right? Mm-hmm. But on a day-to-day basis, how do you drive or ensure that your team and the people you work with are driving gender equality issues? And we talk about race issues, but sometimes the African context, it's not really about race, right? It's about different things. How do you drive your equality agenda?
Yeah.
That broadly.
So let me actually address. Sometimes it is actually about race or ethnicity. Right. So this is in the markets that we operate in, we operate in East and West Africa. And there's a lot of data out there that indicates that the vast majority of venture capital funding that went to companies in Kenya and broadly East Africa It's something absurd, like 98% went to white expat founders. So it can still be about race on the continent. Yeah, I know. Hold on. I'll let you absorb that for a second. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
I mean, it's absurd on two levels. We'll come to the race part, but the expat part, you know what I mean? It's like, let's start there. So, I mean,
well,
I'm an expat.
There are some reasons behind that, right? And because
what are they?
Okay, so some of the reasons for this are the fact that you get some expats who come to, and let's just choose Kenya. They come to Kenya, they're working for Google, they're working for Facebook. They've come from Silicon Valley where they have the connections to the money, right?
Yes.
And so there's a little bit of that, okay, they've already got the connections to the money. Well, couldn't they be using those connections for local founders as well? That's a first question. The second thing that you get quite a bit from people is that, oh, well, the local founders, they don't know how to pitch well. They don't know how to talk to investors. Okay, fine. If that's what you think, then your job as an investor in this market is to make those founders more investment ready. That is your job. And and that's what I talk about with people all of the time. And so part of what we've done in the fund is that we have a ceiling. So we don't want if there's certain companies that are doing just an enormous amount of impact, we want to make sure that we're including them in the fund, but we still have some parameters. So you could still be an expat founder, but you have to have a local management team. Mm-hmm. And you need to be working towards making sure that those are senior managers if they're not already, those are senior managers within your organization. And so the vast majority of your company ends up being local. Because for the other part of it for us too is that if you're an expat founder, and I think about this the same way for myself, my partners are local because I could live in, say, Kenya or Nigeria for the rest of my life, and I'm going to miss nuances of the culture, right? Yeah. You need to have local partners who understand.
Yeah. There's such practical reasons for doing this, and you remember when we're talking about your whole with the one firm which was trying to hire you, and I was saying people really miss where these different perspectives add tremendous value to the business, right? I'm in Singapore. I could be here for 50 years. There are going to be things that I'm just not going to get, because there are some things about the place that you grow up in that just, it's hard to explain. Like, you'll just miss those nuances, right? Whether it's in language or in like just the way people engage. So I continue to be unpleasantly surprised by the fact that we're still having these kinds of conversations, right? And I mean, I don't dismiss it out of hand to say these decisions don't have any merit at all. Because to your point around, if you have the connections, of course, all of this at some level is personal, right? If I'm the one bringing the connections from Silicon Valley, it's my connections, it's my brainchild, all of that. But you're getting into a space that is not your space. And so as you're asking to be accommodated, you must accommodate. To me, that is so incredibly important, right? It's like you're coming up, you're going to set up shop, you're going to take up space. And so you must create space as you take up space. That's how this works. Or at least it should work.
Well, no, because I think if I'm going to be brash about it, right, it's another form of white colonialism is what it is. And so we need to be going back to being intentional. We have to be very intentional about making sure that if we are in these markets, that we are providing funds to the local founders who are going to stay. Because that's the other thing too. You have a risk of an expat founder who, let's just say COVID-19 happens, and they either somehow get stuck outside the country like I did, or they just think, oh, this is too risky. I'm going to go. Right? But if you are investing in local people in that country, they're not leaving. And they are so much more dedicated to making sure that what they're building works for the people in their country. Yeah. And so I think one of the things that, going back to this idea of how I see an affinity as well, between kind of how I grew up in Alaska and the markets that I'm in Africa is that Alaskans feel that way about Alaska. And though it's a harder place to live, people figure stuff out, right? It's kind of like you were talking about the powdered milk. We couldn't always get everything all the time, right? And so if you couldn't, you couldn't buy a part from the store, or it was going to take 6 weeks to get there, or in some cases 6 months because you had to put it on a barge or something like that. People just made it, right? You figured it out.
You figured it out. Yeah.
Exactly what I see in these markets. People are just going to figure it out. And I think in particular, when you're navigating, the different shocks that, whether it's an economic shock or, could be something related to weather that happens in these markets, you need to have local people who know how to navigate that. They've seen it before. They know who to talk to. They know, okay, the supply chain broke over here. I need to go over here. And so that, to me, it's a risk mitigation to ensure that you're actually also, you're investing in the local founders in the country as well.
Yeah. Lisa, this is a really good segue, because I think we're talking about who gets the funding and who doesn't. So I want to ask this last question and then kind of seg a little bit. One of the things that we talk about often is we've been talking about gender equality and funding women's businesses and so on and so forth. One of the questions I have asked personally, and I am a member of a women's speaker group here, one of the questions I have raised is, when we talk, I support gender equality, 100% gender parity, all of that. I think it's really important. One of the things I always raise a flag about and say we need to be paying attention to this is that while we know that on a racetrack, men, generally speaking, start ahead of women, we cannot assume that all women are starting in the same place. And so a lot of the rhetoric I hear about gender equality, I challenge, because I'm saying, well, okay, we need to understand that women of color generally start behind. Poorer women generally start behind. Less educated women generally start behind. So we cannot paint with a broad brush. And so I would like to get your perspective on that, because when I raise this question, and I mind where I raise it, right? Because in a way, people can hold their breath and go, okay, we're supposed to be, as women, pushing back against patriarchy, pushing back against male chauvinism, pushing back against people that tell us that women can't do X, Y, Z. My question is, okay, but within this sisterhood of women, though, you do recognize some women feel like we're not starting in the same place. So if we cannot address that head on, then what are we talking about here? We can fight patriarchy till we're blue in the face. Eventually, we're going to have to come back and clean up our own backyard. So why not just do both simultaneously?
Yep. Intersectionality.
Yep.
This is the conversation I have with people all of the time. In that we all have some level of privilege, right? And we need to recognize what that privilege is. For some people, it's education. For some people, they were born with more wealth than others. For others, it's race or it's their gender. And I think where people get really uncomfortable is, wait, no, I don't have privilege. I grew up poor, or I grew up, X, Y, and Z. But the fact of the matter is that you shouldn't feel ashamed of your privilege. It is something that you didn't necessarily do to get. It is just there. But you just need to recognize that you have it, and you probably got into a certain place in your life because you had it. It doesn't mean that you didn't work hard. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve everything that you have. It just means that someone else, to get to the same place that you are, would have to work 2 times, 3 times, 4 times as hard, or may never actually get there. Ever. Yeah. And so I think I was having a conversation, actually. So a lot of the conversations I've been having this past week and a bit have been with other white people, trying to understand, you know, what white privilege is, first of all, or just what privilege is just generally, and that no one's trying to shame them. It's just, you know, this recognition, and particularly for women, this has been very difficult, I think, for some white women, because especially if what I find fascinating is like these are women who are already like fighting for women's rights, and we've been talking about intersectionality with you know, the movement around people of color, because this has been a really big topic in the women's movement in the United States, because it started to splinter because people weren't recognizing that you know, people are not starting from the same place, and we need to make sure that all the voices are elevated and that we recognize that everyone's coming from a different place. But so having these conversations with these women this week, I was like, wow, how do you not know? How is this possible? I mean, it was blowing my mind. People that I've known for a really long time, who I don't know, maybe I assumed, and maybe that's my fault, right? Maybe that's my fault. My fault as for not doing my job as an ally, for speaking up to my white friends, particularly my white girlfriends, about these issues more, because I thought we all thought the same thing, and we didn't.
You know what is so really, actually, it's fantastic about the question you asked, how do they not know? I'll propose one of the reasons. If you think about the way that America is built, right? And I saw this fantastic article by Michelle Silverthorne, who actually was on the show a few months ago. We called it this bias thing. And she wrote a brilliant article on Medium where she was saying, okay, if you're asking the question you just said these women were asking, or you were wondering that yourself, ask yourself these questions, right? And among them, she said, think about the neighborhood you grew in. How many non-white people were in that neighborhood? Think about your school. Think about your immediate circle of friends, 3, 4, 5 friends. Think about who your teachers were. Think about, you know, who your first, second, third, fourth, fifth boss, right? When you start to look at who's around you or being around you, what their experiences are, it is no wonder that people don't have access to that world, right? And there's some people in the Black community where this same thing applies, because they don't have access to this other world. However, we do know that if you're a minority in majority context, you will engage with people in the majority group, right? Because I go to work, the vast majority of people that I worked with in the US were white. Now they're Asian. So I have access to those two worlds in a way that neither had access to my world. Mm-hmm. It's just how it is. The question then becomes, what do you do about that, right? So I can understand how people don't know, but in the US, I feel like it's quite built into the structure. If our neighborhoods weren't so segregated, our schools weren't so segregated, our everything just wasn't so segregated, right? If you think about where people actually meet naturally, where is that? Where are those places? Is it church? No. Is it the supermarket? No, because supermarkets are different in different neighborhoods. So if you just think about it, so where do people of different races actually meet in any given context in America? Where is that place? And for me, that's the question.
Yeah. And I shouldn't have stopped there, because I know why they don't know. I get it. But it was me making the assumption, because of the career that I've had, working in so many different markets, working in financial inclusion and seeing lots of injustices around the world, mm-hmm. And poverty and the impacts of that on people's lives. And also just having a really diverse, group of friends and colleagues, from the point that I started my career. It's been very diverse in comparison, in particular to, lots of people that I potentially went to business school with and people that I grew up with. But I think there's also a little bit, and I was having a discussion with some of my Black friends about this too, is that for them, they also see this as a conscious choice to not educate yourself as well, because this is not the first time this has happened in our lifetime, right? I'm 43 years old. This is not the first time this has even happened this year, this, you know, in the last 2 weeks, in the last decade, and etc. I mean, so you choose the types of things that you're going to take in and you're going to actually work on. And this was, and then for some people, they believe it was a conscious choice not to take action. And I think for some that's true, right? You get ensconced in your world, and types of causes that you actually, you know, want to champion, and maybe this doesn't hit your radar for exactly the reasons that you just mentioned, right? Yeah. You're in a particular suburb that perhaps is affluent, and this kind of issue is messing with that balance.
Yeah. And you know, I think as difficult as the last 2 weeks have been, they've been very, very freeing for me. And I'll tell you why. I think seeing what happened to George Floyd, I had so many questions, right? So the part of me that's a lawyer said, what if that video was not surfaced? What if we had never seen that video, right? Yeah. What if we just had never seen that video? There would have been some story sold to some jury. And that's me assuming that it even got to a jury. If they even got arraigned, if they even got arrested, right? So that's one thing. But then the part of me that's just human says, to look at that, to watch that happen, the lack of humanity in that is one thing. But I say it's illuminating because I think for a long time, people have been talking about this in the minority communities, right? Whether it's Black or Hispanic or wherever. People have been talking about it. We've been having these conversations and saying these horrible things are happening. We saw it in Ferguson. We saw it with Trayvon Martin. We've seen all these things. Okay. People always keep asking for more evidence. Well, boom, there you have it. But the thing that struck me really, I mean, this one really, it troubled me and it troubles me still, was the Amy Cooper video.
Yeah.
That, I haven't quite recovered from that one, to be very honest with you. I think the energy that we see in the world asking for changes in the policing system and all that in the aftermath of George Floyd, I think a lot of the energy has gone there, and with it has come, you know, a request for justice for Breonna Taylor. And so I feel like that's taken care of. I come back to Amy Cooper. Why? Because I think for a long time, a lot of Black people have been saying this is a thing that happens.
Yeah.
And I have to be very honest.
I've heard about this for a long time.
So I believed it, but you know what you believe, but you're like, surely people don't really do this. Surely. It, like, so when to watch it live, my mom, I could not believe. So that one I haven't digested because to do. We're talking about privilege. That is someone who fully understands privilege, understands her privilege, understands how to leverage it, understands who understands her privilege, right? The police understand her privilege. She knows exactly what to say to get a response, and is not afraid to use it. So for me, that one is still hanging, Lisa. I
mean, that's why they fired her. She worked at a bank, and they fired her. And I think rightly so, because so when I saw that, this is going to sound terrible, but I wasn't surprised. Not because I knew her or anything else like that, but because I'm aware that these kinds of things happen. And you can see it in littler ways, right? Where someone will ask for the manager, at a store. They're not getting their way with, right? And I've seen that happen before. And so, I mean, this was an extreme example, right? But some of the commentary that I initially saw were people trying to make excuses for her, and oh, she doesn't seem mentally sound. Does she seem mentally sound? Well, no, she's clearly imbalanced, but in the sense of like she's being imbalanced by her bias. And to me, full stop. I'm sorry. Everything that she got, she deserved, in the sense of she lost her job and there are some other things. But the fact of the matter is that she wielded a weapon that could have led to a man's death. Could have led to a man's death. For having him ask respectfully for her to leash her dog in a place where the dog should not have been unleashed anyway. Right.
And so that part continues to blow my mind, because what it says to me is, you have the audacity to question me. That's what it says to me. If this was a situation where two people were arguing about something or in some kind of dispute, that's one thing, but you are being told to abide by the rules of the place.
Yeah.
That's it. And for that to be the response. And I'm always very careful about these things, right? Only because I always say, fundamentally, at the end of the day, we are human beings and we all have biases. And caught on the wrong day, your bias may show up in a really ugly way. Yeah. But that really, I felt very disheartened watching that because of the point that you made. A lot of people say it's a gross exaggeration to say that what she did could have led to a man's death, right? And I said, in the context of America, it is not an exaggeration.
Oh, and the other part of this that I found very troubling as well is that she had every opportunity to just walk away. She could have just walked away.
Yes.
Escalated the situation and walked away. And that's not what she did. She chose to go to the extreme.
Mm. I'm curious to know what the police officer who showed up on the scene and then found out what happened, how they felt about that. Because I will feel like,
well, when they got there wasn't anyone there. It had they had. I believe that's the case.
No, I'm saying like now that they know what actually transpired, right? I feel like how I want to know how they feel, because it makes it sows so much doubt in the system, right? If I'm that cop, the next time I hear this kind of, oh my God, there's an African American man who's threatening me and my dog, like, do you? And we don't want our police officers to pause if there's a real crime taking place. We want them to show up. We don't want them to use excessive force. We don't want to have boys and girls crying wolf. And fundamentally, that's what happened here. And so it sows doubt here and there, right, Lisa? And for me, that's the other dimension of it is, we don't need our law enforcement to hesitate when they're responding to crimes that are happening. We need them to show up and do their jobs, not to be questioning, can I believe this? Should I believe this? And I mean, I'm not terribly worried that that's what's going to happen after this, but you can see how people just start to question, right? What do you think for a lot of your friends or community is still being fundamentally misunderstood about some of these issues we've been talking about? So we talked about the fact that they don't know, maybe because they're removed, but what are some of the other things that are just not being understood?
Mm-hmm. Well, and actually let me put a little bit more nuance in there too. I think there are people who don't know. There are people who have been on the process of developing themselves as an ally, and they're still early days in that, so they'll still say, wrong things. I'll still say wrong things, right? Because as you had said this before, a bias is just structured within our society. And there is an amazing writer, I'm going to pronounce his name incorrectly, Ibram Kenzie, I believe, but he described it in a way that the way that it works is, you're standing out in the rain and you're wet, but part of the way that this works is you believe, you're convinced that you're not wet. And then someone comes along and says, oh, you're wet, here, have an umbrella. And it completely opens up your perspective. But it literally is like opening your eyes, but you still have to deconstruct all of those things that you learned over an entire lifetime, and how we see, even little things within society that are biased in a lot of different ways. And it's uncomfortable for people. And I encourage people to sit with that discomfort. That is something that I've actually said to people occasionally, is like, I know, this doesn't feel good. Absolutely not. But you got to sit with that, with discomfort, in order to grow.
Yeah.
Right? You have to do that. You have to do that work. This is hard. But if we're going to get to a place where everyone does really have access to the same types of opportunities, and we're stripping away the racism and the bias within our society, we all have to do that work. To use this as a little bit of a parallel, why I've gotten into my work, we have to do that when it comes to gender equality too.
Yeah.
It goes back to this intersectionality piece, right? Everybody has to become an ally for everybody else, because we all have power that we wield in different situations, and we need to be able to wield that on the side of equality wherever we can.
Last night, it's probably not the best time to have done this, but last night my movie of choice was A Time to Kill.
Oh,
I don't know if you've seen that, with Samuel L. Jackson. And I've watched that movie. It's fantastic. That scene at the very end, where Matthew McConaughey's character is addressing the jury, to me, is one of the things that we should just have on social media right now, for people to understand what this looks like and what it feels like from the perspective of minorities, right? Because I think it said something. We often talk about imposter syndrome, right? And people, especially women, dealing with imposter syndrome. And it's very easy to chalk it up to people feeling insecure. And I said, yeah, there are a lot of us who feel insecure. I feel insecure from time to time, but let's check where that insecurity is coming from. When I was in college, I remember this as clear as day. I had just gotten into law school, and I was riding off. I got on the bus, going across from one end of the campus to another, University of Minnesota. And this elderly woman gets on, she sits with me, next to me, and we're just having a nice chit chat. And then she says to me, so what year are you? I said, no, I'm graduating in the spring. That was winter. I'm graduating in the spring. She said, what are you going to be doing? I said, I'm going to law school. She said, where are you going? And I said, Michigan. She said, Michigan? I said, University of Michigan, yeah. She said, you're going to the University of Michigan? I said, yes. She said, not Michigan State? I said, no. She said, the one in Ann Arbor?
Okay.
So just, think about that interaction, right? I'm sitting there going, no, I just told you where I'm going. And there's this, are you sure? Because that's what I heard in the question. Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Right? So these things happen. I've been on flights, and I've shared this story before in my article when I wrote about what it's like to be an expat. I remember this has happened to me 2 or 3 times. I'm standing in a lane, minding my business, right? They say, okay, business class passengers line up. I'm traveling with my son, so we line up. And I literally had a woman tell me, the children's lane is over there. So my response was, I know. And she says, well, and I say, well, and she said, but the children's lane is over there. And so this is happening. and one of the flight attendants comes over and then says, can I see your boarding pass? And I say, absolutely not. He's like, well, this is and I said, I can read. It says business class. So what I'm sharing with you is, and this happens in small ways, right?
Yeah.
But it's a constant questioning of whether you are supposed to be where you are. And after a while, if you don't keep your stuff together, you can start questioning that yourself. It is exhausting. And after a while, people are just tired of being questioned, of being like walking around with this question mark. And I remember when I got into Michigan, it was right after this big lawsuit, the affirmative action lawsuit. So a lot of people wanted to debate it with me, right? You sometimes feel like an affirmative action. Those conversations have happened.
And I'm not surprised, right?
Yeah. And so,
I'm not surprised.
And so
but I think, or they should be framed in an entirely different way. And I think that's what people are starting to realize is, I think microaggressions is new for a lot of people, right? They've been around for a very long time, of course, but people are starting to finally understand them. And when I said before, like a lot of people are not saying the right things still, and sometimes I even don't. I think, that's the microaggressions in particular is what comes out. But it hurts me so much when you say, to me, it's like every single one of those is just a little bit of a cut. I can't possibly understand the lived experience that you have had. I have a small, tiny little piece of that being a woman in finance and feeling like, oh, well, you're not male, so therefore, should you be here? I know being the only woman on a board a lot of the time, should you be here? And definitely, having a little bit of that. And I think, actually, that's where we all need to start. We have all been in a situation where if we want to understand what's going on right now, and I go like this because I'm in Chicago and everything that's going on between the protests and the riots and the looting and everything. There's just so much, there's a lot of justified anger, but there's a lot of people who don't understand why it's justified. And how I talk to them about that is, remember a situation where you have felt powerless.
Mm-hmm.
And then think about that as having been the majority or the entirety of your life. Mm-hmm. That's where we all need to start, is with that empathy. If we can remember, because of course we've all had that. There's every single one of us at some point in our lives has had an experience that has made us feel powerless and hopeless. But for most of us, right, it's not most of the time. It's maybe a few instances that we can remember, but if we can draw on that, then we can start to understand why there is so much anger right now and why things have to change.
I have to correct something you said though, Lisa. I don't think all of us have had that. And I say this because I have asked this question and I've had some people say, actually, I've never felt discriminated against. I've never felt left out. And it's been a few people, but they've all been white men. And I thank them for their honesty, because I think being candid about that is the entry point for conversation. Because in those instances that I had, 4 or 5 of them, it then became a conversation about, okay, so if you've never experienced this, do you even understand then when people talk about this? And the answer was no. So help me understand, because I just haven't had that. I am not a person of color. I didn't grow up poor. I don't have any kind of ability. I have had access to the best schools. I am in top jobs, in top companies. And first of all, admitting that is a great first step to saying that, no, I don't relate. I can't relate. So therefore, help me understand. And I think we need to create space for people with those experiences to express that, because I don't think it's easy, especially in this climate, for anybody to say, no, I don't know what this feels like. I really don't. And because we get all upset and crazy, I think it's their fault that they grew up with all this privilege, right? But if we don't create that space to have that conversation, then we make comments like, well, everybody has this, but everybody doesn't. And for those who are saying, it's not my experience, help me understand what that experience is like so I can be an ally, we need to create that space for them.
That's entirely fair. I
I
guess
know it's hard to
I
believe,
made an
right?
assumption that everyone at some point in their life has felt powerless, but I guess that's true. There are some people who probably have never felt powerless their entire lives. That's alien to me.
It is alien to me, and I was surprised when I got that answer. It was very fascinating, and they explained it. At the end of the day, I who knows where all this is gonna go. I think that it all comes back to a very personal level, right? In the sense that we just want to go to work. We just want our kids to have, the best possible education. We just want to live in safe communities. And when I say we, I mean everybody. I'm not just talking about Black people, right? The question continues to be, how do we engage in these dialogues that allow us to actually have those conversations, right? How do we, and I've had a number of white friends say to me, I don't know what to say. I don't know where to start. I don't say anything because I'm afraid people will come at me. And you and I have had this conversation, right? About if I say something, am I overstepping? And I think it's important for us to understand that perspective. So if you want to say something about that, Lisa, I would appreciate hearing that from you. The perspective around when you choose to speak and not to speak, and the why behind that.
I'm still struggling with the balance of that, by the way. But one thing that I've chosen to do a lot over the last, week and a bit is, and before this as well, but, because of the current situation, one of the things that I want to do is say to people, I'm glad that you want to learn, but it is not the responsibility of your Black and brown friends to educate you. And so I see this is a mantle that I'm taking on myself. So when I've been talking, mainly, I've been talking to, talking to anybody on Facebook, right? but in some of the discussion forums that I'm in particular, one of the things that I'll start by saying is that I want to become a better ally, and to do that, I'm going to take that element of education off of others and put that on myself. And say, if you are a white person who wants to learn, come to me. I will help you. I will provide you with resources. Get into a place first where you can then go and listen and understand the stories that your Black and brown friends are saying, but don't have them educate you. Don't give them that burden, because we've had Google it first, right? There's your first action item. If you want to learn, go Google it, because everything is out there. Decades upon decades, actually hundreds of years worth of commentary and experience is out there for you to take in.
Yes. And let me add something to that. Teach your children American history in its totality. I tell you what, I moved to the US when I was 16, right? And then I came in and I went to I did my senior year. And in my high school, I was asked to pick my electives, and one of my choices was African American history. I was like, what is African American history? I'm a 17-year-old African girl, right, who's just coming. I'm like, what is African American history? And I asked that question because in Cameroon, we had to learn Cameroon history, African history, and world history, right? So we learned about Martin Luther King and Lincoln and George Washington in one fell swoop, right? It wasn't cut along the lines of race. So it was very confusing to me. And the fact that it was an elective, we talk about why don't a lot of white people know what's going on. If you have it or you segregate it and you have Native American history over there, African American history over there, and then you have US history. So these other histories are not part of US history, really? And then we wonder why people grow up and they don't have the context. Well, look at our educational system. What are we teaching people, right? So I think that's a really important place to start. And this whole idea of African American literature, I think it's good if you're doing that in university to go deeper into it. But we should be reading Langston Hughes, because great American writer, right? We should be reading Zora Neale Hurston because Their Eyes Were Watching God is a damn fantastic book. Toni Morrison, And the list goes on, because brilliant American writers, not brilliant Black American writers. So I think that education needs to be happening.
It's so right. It's so right. And this is where I find myself to be really lucky. So Alaska, only became a state not even 2 decades before I was born, right? So it's a relatively young state, had a lot of money because of the oil, so it pumped a lot of it into its education system. And so we had the latest of everything. My elementary school was built the year I went into first grade. And so we had, everything was brand new, including, all of the textbooks and everything. Like all of those writers that you just talked about, I read those in high school as just part of our typical literature. And we learned about the history, but I know that that's not true in every school district across the United States. And so I guess a little bit of going back to this idea of like how some people don't know. Yeah, they just never got the real education about, and I want to also include here also the education about Native American history in the United States as well.
Oh my goodness.
And so I think there are two massive pieces of American history that often people miss as they're coming up, depending on where in the United States they grew up, because there isn't this common language of history that we all get to learn. It's very much decided by the state, by each one of the states, and they get to put their spin on what kids are actually going to learn.
Yeah. My last commentary on this, and I know I've kept you way past your bedtime. My last commentary on this piece is this. I have said this to a lot of my Black friends and other African Americans in my circle, which is, in all this chaos, and I recognize what it is, in all this chaos, there is something to be said about voice, because I really believe that voice is power. The fact that in the midst of coronavirus, the protest about what happened to George Floyd has interrupted the news cycle in the way that it is power. It's power. And we need to understand the strength of that power and use it. And I say that because juxtaposed against Native Americans, I don't recall a time when anything bad that happened to Native American got any kind of anything, right? They own the land on which America is built. And yet from a voice perspective, very little. And so in all of this, and some people are going to be upset with me for saying it, but I need, if we are pushing for social justice, we've got to call a spade a spade. I think Native Americans don't even have the kind of power of voice that Black people have. We're disenfranchised in so many ways, but look what happened. There's a lot of outrage and something is happening. A movement has been born. I haven't seen that happen in a Native American context. And you and I know there's a lot of disenfranchisement in that community. So I would just say,
the health outcomes, the violence against women, the arrest record. I mean, all of these pieces are just as bad or worse in the Indigenous communities because of, once again, it goes back to structural bias within society. And I do think, I want to say there is a voice there. There absolutely is a voice there. Is it elevated in the same way that this movement is right now? No, it's not. And it suffers in the same way that the Black Lives Matter movement has suffered, in the sense of, there's an inciting event and then it dies down, and there's an inciting event and then it dies down again. And I think what this goes back to, actually, I want to say two things. One, you asked me before, like, where should my voice come into this? My voice should be elevating these other voices, right? Mm-hmm. That's where I should be stepping in. I should be saying, here, listen to this person over here. Read this person over here. Educate yourself on what has been happening, and then go and take action in some way, shape, or form.
So let me clarify the point I was making. It's not that the Native American community is not vocal. It's not that they're not speaking up. It's not that there's no power there. It's that it is, the point you make, it is not as elevated. It is not even nearly as heard or as entertained. Because I'm looking back over the last decade, for example, just an example, and I'm trying to think, we know there have been similar events, right? Not as terrible, but actually we don't know if it's as terrible because, you know, we tend not to actually know what's going on in Native American communities, which is a whole issue on its own. What I'm saying is I haven't seen this level of outcry happen where people have paid attention when it was a transgression against the Native Americans. So what I'm saying is, as our community elevates, as we rise up and we challenge the system, it's really important that we elevate the voices of other minority communities which are facing the same thing. And a good example is a friend of mine, in the midst of all this, had this amazing posting on her page, which was talking about how disabled people get hurt by police all the time because they don't even know what's going on, right? We know the incidents of police brutality against the mentally ill, right? So she was using that platform then to say, okay, this is happening to African Americans, but let's also make a note that this happens to disabled people because of X, Y, and Z. So that's my point is, we have voice. That's the voice that's kind of being heard right now. Let's elevate people who are facing the same kind of issues with police brutality as a coalition.
Right. It goes back to what we were talking about before with intersectionality. The rights have to apply to everybody. Yeah. And yes, I agree with you. There's much more of a voice, and that's being, you know, shouted out at this point, right? It's just at greater volume. But I think where we need to be careful so that the same thing that has happened in the past doesn't happen again is we need to start holding each other accountable. We need to start making sure that, you know, if I say I'm going to do something, I have someone I check in with 6 months from now who says, did you do that? Did you take that action? And we do that with ourselves. We do that with our communities. We do that with our police force. We do that with all of our leaders that we're voting for. And we've got a pretty significant election coming up here in November. And that's the way to hold people accountable. And that's what we really need to do. If this isn't going to die back down into a whisper again, and we're going to be able to make it, you know, just the soaring chorus that actually changes the course of history in the US, which is what I'm really hoping is actually going to happen now. We need to get out there and really take action as a united people and you know, vote for the people who are actually going to help us make this change. Because we need everybody. Everybody has to be in this fight.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, this has been intense and fun. And I think it's an example of the kind of conversations that we should try to have, right, when things happen. And I almost said conversations to have across racial lines. But that's the thing. I wanted it to just be two women talking, two girls talking, right? And to put these issues on the table, because I think sometimes we forget that hard conversations can happen even with people from the same household, right? And we just have to suck it up and have those conversations. So thank you for sharing your perspective, sharing your thoughts. And quite frankly, I've learned a lot. This has been great. I hope you will come back. And thank you for joining up for me.
No, thank you. I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you as well. I think, these are hard. And, you know, in my mind, I'm always kind of thinking, okay, I'm about to say the wrong thing, et cetera. But you gotta enter into these conversations with courage and bravery, and know that the other person on the other side of the table from you, you want to find that common ground, which I know you do. And so we can learn from each other, which is great.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you get back to your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Stay safe and well. We are still in the times of COVID, so make sure that you're taking all precautions.
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck at home. There's not too much that I can do. I don't get to start roaming the world until I think next month, perhaps. So yeah, when we roll out phase 2 here. So yeah. All right. Take care, Lisa.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please share your thoughts in the comments below or email us at ab@mamatoktok.com. Continue the conversation in your homes and communities. And when you join us next week, invite a friend or many. For more diverse perspectives on everyday issues from everyday people around the globe, subscribe to our podcast at mamatoktok.com/a different take. And join our online family by following us on Twitter and Instagram. Until we meet again, I'm your host, AB Mambo. Sigashina, stay well.